As we continue our Hall of Fame series, we're going to talk about the guy whose jersey is right behind me, one of the best running backs to ever do it, the Thurminator, Thurman Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Believers Talk. My name is Joe, and welcome to another Hall of Fame edition of Believers Talk, where we take a look at all of the Buffalo Bills Hall of Famers, taking a look back at some of the greatest of Buffalo Bills history. Before we do that, guys, I want to remind everyone, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for continual Buffalo sports coverage, including our Buffalo Bills season not too far away. So hit that subscribe button. After you hit that subscribe button, you want to hit that notification bell. YouTube will notify you when we put out new content. Also, while you're here, hit that thumbs up button and leave a comment. Let me know what you think or thought of Buffalo Bills legend Thurman Thomas. Now, there's a lot to talk about in this edition of Believers Talk, so we're going to try to get right into it. I have a special guest, Matt Parrino from Syracuse.com, joining me a little bit later to talk more about the great Thurman Thomas. So let's talk about where Thurman Thomas came from and some of the accolades that he got during his NFL career. First, he played his college ball at Oklahoma State in the late 1980s. Some of you might remember that backfield, and when you think about Thurman Thomas at Oklahoma State, you might also remember another great running back in the NFL, another Hall of Fame running back, and that is one Barry Sanders. That's right, both Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders played at Oklahoma State for the final 2 seasons of Thurman Thomas's career. Thurman Thomas was the second round draft pick by the Buffalo Bills in 1988. The Buffalo Bills actually don't have a first round draft pick in 1988. They're happy to see Thurman Thomas fall that far. Thurman Thomas did have some injury concerns coming out of college, which helped him drop to the Buffalo Bills in the second round. Hey, we're not complaining, are we? We'll take Thurman Thomas there in the second round. And while Thurman Thomas was in the NFL, had a pretty darn good NFL career. He led the NFL in total yards from scrimmage 4 seasons in a row. That's still an NFL record. So for all you fantasy football players, all the people who love playing fantasy football, who get so sick and tired of running backs being great one year and then being so inconsistent the following year, you didn't have that issue back in the early 90s. Thurman Thomas carried the load every single day for the Buffalo Bills, and he did it well. And again, led the NFL in total yards from scrimmage 4 seasons in a row. Won the NFL MVP in 1991. When was the last time you heard of a running back winning the NFL MVP? You have to talk about Adrian Peterson back in the early 2010s. If you want to talk about that, now it's just a quarterback award, right? But back then, guys like Thurman Thomas could win it. And still, I believe that Thurman Thomas was not given the credit that he deserves. Was named to the first or second All-Pro team 5 straight seasons, 5 consecutive Pro Bowls for Thurman Thomas. Talking about 12,074 rushing yards. And on top of that, and maybe this is something that wasn't appreciated as much back when Thurman Thomas played, that really goes appreciated now, and that's his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. Not only did he have over 12,000 rushing yards, also 4,458 receiving yards, for a grand total of 16,532 all-purpose yards, which still ranks 21st all-time on the NFL list of all-purpose yards. Pretty good considering he hasn't been in the league for quite a long time, and considering how the league has become an offensive league in the past decade or so. He also had 65 rushing touchdowns in his career. He was, at time of retirement, he was second in rushing touchdowns in the Super Bowl. There are lots of things. Obviously, Thurman Thomas, part of the 4 straight Super Bowls for the Buffalo Bills. Unfortunately, couldn't bring one of those titles home, but still a great career for Thurman Thomas. And like I said, we have a lot to get into. And so to help me with that, we had Matt Parrino on the show. I interviewed Matt Parrino again from Syracuse.com. Check out his descriptions or his links below and check out his content. But I'm going to take you to that interview. Really glad to have him on this channel to talk about Buffalo Bills Hall of Famer Thurman Thomas. And to continue talking about Buffalo Bills Hall of Famer Thurman Thomas, I thought I would bring on Matt Parrino from Syracuse.com. Matt, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Thank you for having me In here, Believers. It's funny. I when I first started writing, right as I was getting into college, I want to say maybe 13, 14 years ago, there was a message board
Mm-hmm.
called Believers.
Mm-hmm.
And those were some of my first posts as a very raw blogger.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I have a little soft spot in my heart for the name. So very cool.
There you go. I'm just bringing it back. That's all I'm doing. And Matt, I did want also talk to you for a second and just thank you for your willingness not only to be on Believers Talk today, but I've talked to hashtag sports. I've talked to others, and just your willingness to spend time with fellow Bills fans. I think that's awesome. Anytime we can get a chance to get together and talk Buffalo Bills, it's always a cool thing.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, man, this is like, it's a big community, man. I love the passion of Bills Mafia, so I always try to give back my time whenever I can.
Absolutely. So, guys, again, Matt Parrino from Syracuse.com also started a podcast recently called Shout, a Buffalo Bills podcast. Both those links will be in the description below, so make sure you check that out. But let's talk about Buffalo Bills Hall of Famer Thurman Thomas. A few weeks ago, I had sent Matt a message saying, who is your favorite Buffalo Bills Hall of Famer? And he said, the man, Thurman Thomas. So why is Thurman Thomas your favorite Buffalo Bills Hall of Famer?
Yeah, man. I mean, that's not even a question that I have to spend any time thinking about. Like, for me growing up, every time I watched a Bills game, and like I was born in 82. So when they really started to take off in the 80s, like I was late 80s, I was really just getting old enough to where my dad and my grandfather were watching the games, and I was starting to kind of understand things. And by Super Bowl 25, I was pretty dialed in. I mean, I was pretty locked in. And every time I watched the game, my earliest memories are just of him and just his ability to do anything on a football field. I went back and watched A Football Life with Thurman Thomas, and just to spend some time and kind of recharge the memory. I spend so much time with this football team now that it's hard to remember even back to before Josh Allen what this thing was like. But Thurman, just like, to me, like, Thurman was the greatest Buffalo sports figure. And he didn't even get like the national respect, I don't think. Like, I think like if you talk to guys like Emmitt Smith, who I think called him the greatest running back in the league after the Super Bowl, and you hear Barry Sanders talk about him and all these guys that had reverence for him, but he always had to play with that chip on his shoulder. I don't think he ever got the respect that he deserved. And he was just he was so special, man. And like, and he kind of was that back that, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say I'm an NFL aficionado, but he was definitely a trailblazer when it came to that dual threat running back, a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield, make plays in the passing game. I think Jim Kelly would even tell you to this day that if not for Thurman Thomas, I mean, what would his career would have been like? Because he got him out of a lot of jams. So I just love Thurman. I love the way that he played the game. I love the chip on his shoulder. I love that he had to play his – I felt like he embodied Buffalo. Like, this is a guy that got overlooked, that kind of was an afterthought, that, you know, maybe had some great times at Oklahoma State, but then went through some struggles with the injury and the question marks, but then came back in the NFL and really made himself into one of the greatest running backs of all time. And I think for a city that's always starving for that national attention and that national recognition, Thurman is our greatest accomplishment, I think. I mean, and it's weird because I still think to this day, even maybe within Bills Nation, I still don't think that how great he was is really truly understood. So that's just my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a chip on his shoulder, and you talk about his college playing days. I mean, it's hard to believe that, and he even talked about this in his Hall of Fame enshrinement ceremony, about how the last 2 years in college he had to work extra hard because there was a guy named Barry Sanders behind him ready to take his starting job. So you think about that backfield for a second, Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders. It's amazing any defense could stop them. So I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite, if you have one, a favorite Thurman Thomas moment?
So it's hard because, like, I mean, it just, like I said, it's like this highlight reel in my head. Like, and I was so young, you know, when he was really great. But I will say that run in the Super Bowl, the touchdown run to put him up, in the second half.
Yeah.
That to me, I think that's probably where where he became my favorite player. Cause like, man, this dude on the national stage, like everybody is watching this game. We had off from school on the Friday before the game, and it was just the biggest moment. Like,
Yeah.
And it's weird because like I consider myself lucky. I talk to Bills fans, and like I'll be honest, like so the last 10 years as I've gotten into the professional field of journalism covering pro sports, you just kind of become a different kind of fan. Like you don't watch games the same way anymore.
Right.
And even now covering the team, that's even taken to another level because there's no way to cover a team, in my opinion, as a fan. Like, and I tell people this all the time, like, I still have passion for Buffalo and fans like you and Mario and so many other Rockpile dudes. Like I remember being in that place. I don't experience it the same way anymore. But I feel so lucky because so many people I know that are maybe 10 years younger than me have gone through 2 decades of absolute just suffering, and I got to live through. They never won it, but it was the best of times, man. It was a great run, and Thurman was at the forefront of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where would you rank Thurman Thomas all time as far as best running backs all time? Where does Thurman Thomas rank in your book?
That's a great question, man. That's really hard for me because obviously there's the bias there,
right?
But I think like I would put him. I know this is probably crazy. I would put Emmett ahead of him just because of the longevity and the Super Bowls and all that kind of stuff, which I'll argue that when you're talking about individual greatness, arguing team accolades, like I'm a big LeBron guy and I argue LeBron. I don't argue LeBron better than Michael, but I do argue that they're in the same conversation in terms of just revolutionizing the game. And I think that like Thurman was so before his time that the Barry Thurman part of it, and like you mentioned, how crazy is it? Like that is probably the most. There will never be a backfield at any level of football that good ever again. But like I think it depends on what day you ask me. Like today I might say Barry, the next day I might say Thurman because Barry was like, he was just special, dude. Every time he touched the ball, it was like, oh my gosh! Like I remember watching him and he was so great. But I'd probably put him – I'd definitely put him top 5.
Okay.
Where he lands in that, I don't know if I can really go there. Because I also think I don't like ranking between eras. It's why I really struggle with guys like Bill Russell and even to a lesser degree, like guys like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird compared – like Larry Bird compared to Kevin Durant and LeBron James. Like I don't know if Larry Bird can play in this era basketball. Maybe he could, and there's people that would argue it. Would Dan Marino be even better in the modern era of football where there's all these like rules where so it's tough I think to compare and to rank, but I think for his era I think I'd probably go Emmett, Thurman, Barry for their era. But I can't believe seeing the names that teams took some of these running backs over Thurman in that draft. Man, just epically bad decision making, and I think it brings us to modern time and like the importance of having decision makers that are putting your team in a position to be successful. I mean, we still have a lot of runway here till we can really dive into Brandon Beane's 2 draft class here, but so far so good.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of modern times, you did a great job segueing me to the next question. What are some of the similarities that you see between Thurman Thomas and Buffalo Bills' current starting running back, Devin Singletary? You talk about how Thurman Thomas was a great guy out of the backfield. He was, before his time at the running back position. Me personally, I think Thurman Thomas might have done better today than he did back when he played the game, just because of how the game has evolved and the running back has to be that dual threat. You think about like Christian McCaffrey, and I would put Thurman Thomas up there with that type of name when you talk about his dual threat capabilities. So what do you see similarly between what we saw from Thurman Thomas and Devin Singletary?
Yeah, that's a good question. one thing that I was really surprised at going back and watching Thurman's highlights, and I really think the biggest similarity between Thurman and Devin is their ability to bounce off tackles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Devin's not really this home run hitter, and I know everybody wanted that this offseason, and Zach Moss is more of that physical, like, abusive type back, who I still think can break some runs, but we'll see what that looks like. And I still think Devin can break some runs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't see a ton of it, but, like, you know, if you're able to get to that second level, if this offensive line is a little bit better in 2020, right, and you're
Mm-hmm.
able to get that to the second level without having to sustain that first hit,
Mm-hmm.
I think then that's where Devin becomes a scary, maybe not home run threat, but big play threat, because he can then bounce off that first tackle at maybe 7, 8, 9 yards past the line of scrimmage and then turn that into a 20, 25-yard game and gain, and that becomes a completely different back than we saw last year. And I think that we're just scratching the surface with what we're going to see out of him as a pass catcher. I think that he showed last year to be pretty reliable in that front. And he'll only get better as he gets more comfortable as a pass blocker. But I think that comparing him at this point to Thurman is a little bit of a disservice to Thurman. I think that he's got a long way to go for sure. And he's another guy that I think people don't talk a lot about this now because, you know, he went to Florida Atlantic and, you know, kind of a lower level school, but he was getting some Heisman buzz going into, I believe it was his sophomore season. They had a whole campaign for him, and they were putting up billboards down in Florida. So this is a legit dude. And the guys that, you know, the way that Frank Gore talked about him, big expectations. The big question with him is his size. Can he stay healthy for a full season? But I think bringing in a guy like Zach Moss and having them kind of share the load is like a perfect complementary duo, because I think that, you know, if one goes out, I think you have a 1A, 1B interchangeable situation potentially. We haven't seen Zach Moss play it down yet in the NFL, but I think that, you know, we had Zach Moss's agent on the podcast recently. It was a really good time. Check that episode out for sure. But she was talking about, like, you know, the injuries that kind of cost him, you know, probably a round or two in the draft. And, you know, before this thing's said and done, who's to say, you know, that he doesn't end up being the top back in this draft. And you're talking about a situation where, you know, New Orleans Saints had an unbelievable offense for years. They still do. But they relied on the two-headed monster with Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. And, you know, in this day and age, you need multiple playmakers. And I think that these two guys are a fun pairing. And I think that Devin Singletary, I think I put out a story with, like, bold predictions a couple weeks ago. And one of them was, I think that Devin is going to rush for 1,200 yards this year, because I think that he was actually projecting to go over 1,000 if he had played all 16 games. So, you know, I don't think it's that bold actually, but we'll see.
Yeah, and you know, it's always tough all-purpose versus rushing yards, right? It all depends on what this offense does. You know, I looked at that previous episode. I looked at Brian Dable's percentage as far as run percentage compared to pass percentage. Who knows if that's going to go up now with the addition of Stephon Diggs and what that might do to the running game. But yeah, I could definitely see Singletary over 1,000, 1,200 yards this season. But another great segue into my next question, and this is where you know, I'll leave you off here. Do you think it's better? Now, I mean no disrespect to Kenneth Davis, but back in the early 90s, it was Thurman Thomas's backfield. So do you think it's better to have a primary back, one guy run the ship, with a secondary guy like a Kenneth Davis who can do the job if needed? We saw him come in a couple times when Thomas did get hurt and fill the role quite nicely. Or do you like this, try to have this 1-2 punch, so to speak, between Devin Singletary and Zach Moss? You brought Kamara and Ingram earlier. I was looking at, you know, Jonathan Stewart and Janjo Williams back in the Carolina Panther days, since we have so many ties with Carolina. What do you think is more effective in today's NFL?
I mean, definitely multiple backs, because it's such a physical game. Not that it always wasn't a physical game, it was. But when you're talking about guys like Tremaine Edmonds coming down full blast at you up the middle, I mean, it's a physical, punishing game. And so I think to have the kind of depth that you need, I mean, look at Kansas City. if they weren't building that backfield full of depth, and we're talking about Damian Williams, who was a castaway from Miami, and nobody even thought about that. We're not talking about draft capital. We're talking about throwaway guys like the Kareem Hunt situation. They go and they win a Super Bowl, and he was arguably in the running for the MVP down the stretch there. So you got to build depth in your backfield. I will say it till my last breath. I'm a big low-key fan of the TJ Yeldon edition. I think that if given the opportunity, he could play a role too. I think just because Zach Moss is in the situation now, TJ Yeldon's role probably goes back to something similar as it was in 2019. But, look at some of the teams that are having success in this league. I mentioned Kansas City. You mentioned the Patriots these years with all these little scat backs. And, then they drafted Sony Michel, and the Bills fans know about how good he can be at times. And so and San Francisco, I mean, I think that's the model. I mean, Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida were the guys that they were really depending on. And then, oh, by the way, watch out for Raheem Mostert. It kind of makes me think, like, Mostert's I've been really dubious and apprehensive to really embrace Christian Wade mania because, listen, it's a different situation because this guy is learning a completely different sport. But Mostert is an interesting story because he was a track star. Right. So, I mean, he kind of probably was stealing to a lesser extent. He grew up in America. He's been around the game. But, I think Christian Wade with his physical attributes, even at 29 years old, I think that's interesting. And you get another year. So I'm talking long-term here, maybe not 2020. If you get another year to stash him on your practice squad, he could be somebody that, we could be talking about in a year as a difference maker because Devin Singletary missed a couple games last year. Zach Moss has been hurt and struggled to stay healthy. So you always need to pack your backfield with as many talented players as you can. I think the Bills have done a really nice job of that. And another little thing on Thurman, I couldn't believe this. It's sticking in my head. Talk about difference of the game from when he got drafted to now. 2 fullbacks were drafted before Thurman Thomas. Could you imagine if a fullback was drafted before Zach Moss in the 2020 NFL draft? That GM should be fired. But no, that's just the difference in the game. So I think that I really like the tandem of Devin Singletary. And I know everybody's, joking around motor or I can't remember the little thing that everybody had going, but something about Thunder and Lightning or, Motor and Moss. And, they could be a dynamic duo. And I think the teams that have 2 guys that you could trust to kind of do multiple things. And that's the thing, though. You have to be able to do multiple things. Like you can't, and that's the biggest obstacle for Christian Wade is can he evolve as a pass blocker and learn that part of the game. Even Singletary, who I thought was adequate at it at times last year and at times bad, he was still bad at times, as a pass blocker. You go back to that Houston game, there was a couple missed assignments. So that's a big part of it. You have to be able to trust these guys. And, everybody – and that's another thing too. Like, I bet you if you go back and you watch the Dynasty Bills and you go back to those early days, like the late 80s when they were still trying to figure things out, this thing doesn't happen overnight. Like there's a lot of questions about the play calling and a lot of people are trying to apply some pressure to Brian Dable. And that's fair. There's a lot of pieces in place now. I think expectations should be higher. But I also think at the same time, you have a lot of young pieces and in general, 9 new starters on the offense last year. It's going to take some time for those guys to get comfortable playing together. So I think, one of the big questions I get all the time in all these off-season mailbags and just like when I put out questions on Instagram or wherever is, what do you think about the offensive line? Do you think they should have done more? Well, yeah, you probably always wish that they could have done more. But at the same time, these guys played 17 games together last year, meaningful football. I think that is valuable experience that you could take, tangible experience you could take and apply to this year. And they're entering training camp with a completely different mindset as a unit. So I would like to see what that 5 looks like now. I think Ty Nsekhe is probably going to end up in a I'm sorry, I'm taking you all over the place here, but it's all flooding out of here. I think Ty Nsekhe is probably going to end up in a backup role this year. I think he's 35 years old and really seemed to struggle physically last year. And so I think that he'll kind of be that that old reliable out of the bullpen late in the game. If somebody goes down and Deion Dawkins, or on the other side, Cody Ford, I think they're really going to give Cody Ford every chance this year to be their right tackle. And I think that's what you go back to draft night.
Yeah.
And, Brandon said, I love his position flexibility, but we view him as a right tackle. And so I think they're going to give him every opportunity to be that. And then it's going to be interesting to see where they go from there. I really love Darrell Williams, that addition, because, I studied him pretty hard last offseason when I thought the Bills could maybe take a run at him. And so I don't love him on the inside. I think he's better on the outside, because I think that his real strength was, when he was healthy, was his quickness.
Yeah.
And I just don't think you need to be as quick. And I think at times he can get a little bit overwhelmed. It happened more at left guard when I watched him last year with Carolina, but even at right guard at times, I felt like he got a little bit overwhelmed. But there's so much depth on the offensive line that, this is a whole new ball game. I mean, I can't believe we're only a year and a half removed from talking about Ryan Groy and Russell Bodie.
Yeah, we definitely went through a facelift last year, and like you said, you talk about experience, and you can't speak enough about that, especially in a season like this, where there's not, there might not be any preseason games now. You talk about no mini camp, anything. You have your training camp, and that's pretty much going to be it until the season starts. So having experience together is very important in a season like this, and I think that might be where the Buffalo Bills get the edge. And I'm sure even if you talk to Thurman Thomas back in the late 80s, early 90s, it's all about that offensive line. I'm sure if you talked to him about his Hall of Fame career, he would just name the guys in front and say it's all because of them. So we definitely have to talk offensive line and talk about the running back position. But I did want to thank you, Matt, again, for coming out here. Didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, man, Thurman's an OG, man. Thurman was so fun to watch. I always felt like, looking back on that time, like, the one thing that I always think about is I just feel fortunate. Like I was a really fortunate sports fan. I mean, I got to kind of grow up in Michael Jordan's era that bled right into, and I really got to see, all the modern, NFL players, even to now.
Yeah.
I think it's almost like those people that grew up watching baseball back in the day. They got to watch Ruth and DiMaggio and Hank Aaron and all these greats. We got to see a lot of greats, and one of them was in Buffalo. And, I think the coolest thing about Thurman, too, is not only what he did as a player, but what he meant to the town and how he kind of stands for the town even to this day. I mean, you go watch his induction, his Wall of Fame induction speech, and, he's a Buffalo guy now. And all those guys turned into that. And it doesn't happen often in a lot of places. Right. So it's cool, man. As a guy that grew up in the city, we love those kind of guys.
Absolutely, yeah. Once Buffalo Bill, always Buffalo Bill. So again, Matt, thank you so much. Again, guys, in the description below, Syracuse.com Shout podcast. Make sure you check that out, Matt. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon. But again, thank you for your time.
Anytime, man. Take care.
You too. So again, nothing but thanks and nothing but Buffalo love for our man Matt Parrino. Again, check out the links below, Syracuse.com. Also his podcast link down in the description below. So check those out. Always great have Matt Parrino on the show. Great content. So again, be sure to watch that. But again, thank you for coming on the show, Matt. And thank you guys for watching this episode. We're talking about Hall of Famer Thurman Thomas. Again, leave a comment. What did you think about Buffalo Bills Hall of Famer Thurman Thomas? Do you remember watching him play? And like Matt said, man, if you think about all the great running backs of that time period, Deion Sanders, Emmitt Smith, Thurman Thomas, and there was plenty more to think about. Thurman Thomas ranks right up there with all of those guys, if not sometimes ahead of some of those guys. These great Buffalo Bills teams of the early 90s would not have been what they were without Thurman Thomas. So again, guys, thank you for joining me for this Hall of Fame edition of Believers Talk. Make sure you hit that thumbs up button if you haven't already. Check out the other videos, the other Hall of Fame videos, and be sure to check this out every Friday, 7 p.m., leading up to August, right before the start of the NFL season. Again, thank you for joining me. Leave a comment, like this video. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. I look forward to talking to you all soon. Until I do, go Bills.